year is 1966. After 14 years of being a founding member of the Southeastern Conference, the Tulane Green Wave waved the white flag. School president Herbert Longenecker announces that the school will be vacating the conference they helped create due to an inability to compete. The local school newspaper reported just last year that the football program was hemorrhaging money trying to keep up with its peer institutions, and the school itself had been de-emphasizing athletics in order to keep its academic standings at a higher premium for at least the last 15 years. In the moment, nobody in New Orleans seemed to be too unsure of the decision. Their head coach, Tommy O'Boyle, told the News, "I'm sure it can't do us any harm. Tulane is a national university. Now we can play a national schedule." Even before that, Tulane had been looking at creating a sort of Southern Ivy League, joining forces with schools like SMU, Duke, Vanderbilt, and Rice. But with the gift of hindsight, we know that confidence was short-sighted. From 1952 to 1965, the Green Wave football program had fallen behind just about everybody else in the SEC, going just 37, 95, and 8, and not winning any more than one conference game per season from 1957 onward. The Green Wave had been flushed away. There were reasons for their shortcomings, and most all of them had to do with academic minimum requirements on potential recruits. Other SEC schools were more lax with their academic requirements, and Tulane was not. Jump nearly 60 years into the future, and the Green Wave look as though they're pounding on the Power Conference door, trying to get back in. And, for their part, they look like they're at least somewhat deserving of it. Under Willie Fritz, they rebuilt their program into one of the better teams in the group of five, and John Sumrall after him has kept them at that level. With shifting tides in college sports meaning that the Pac-12, ACC, and potentially even the Big 12 could be looking at planting a flag in Louisiana, Tulane could once again find their way back in the power conferences. But so far, that hasn't come to fruition. With a unique culture and one of college sports' best recruiting talent pools, reputable academics as an institution, and being one of the most resurgent football brands in the entirety of the NCAA, the Green Wave remain on an island. It begs the question, why doesn't anyone want Tulane? Leading up to Tulane's departure from the SEC, it's easy to see why they thought they were falling behind the rest of the conference. At least from a numbers perspective, they absolutely were. Tulane went a moribund 19-72 over their last 10 seasons as members of the SEC from 1956 to 1965, not counting ties. That is a winning percentage of just under 21%. That's a full 15 percentage points worse than the second worst team on this list, which is historical SEC cellar dweller Vanderbilt with just 36. The Green Wave weren't just bad, they were as close as you could get in major college football to a free conference win. Immediately following their return to independence, the 1966 Tulane Green Wave saw that there might be some hope for the future. They cobbled together a schedule of high-profile programs in the South to play in just one season, including a trip out to San Francisco to take on Stanford. Every single one of their opponents in 1966 is now a Power 4 program. Tulane is not. They went 5-4-1 under new head coach Jim Pittman. While it might seem that independence was going to be a good thing for Tulane after that one season, very quickly the same issues that hindered them as a program in the SEC will continue to hinder them outside of it. They'd fall to 3-7 the following year, opening the season with a loss to Miami of Ohio and once again finishing the year on a blowout at the hands of LSU. Saying that it was difficult to recruit to Tulane would be an understatement, especially now that they were an independent and couldn't rely on pitching yearly games against teams like Ole Miss or Alabama. To start off, the fact of the matter was that Tulane football didn't make any money, and in terms of athletic spending, the university was already dirt floor poor. In 1964, the team reportedly lost $500,000 per year in athletics expenditures without seeing the revenue to back it up. Even back in the 60s, if you didn't win football games, you didn't get fans showing up in the ticket booths, which meant you got less money. Win 1 or 2 games per year and it becomes systemic. That doesn't automatically fix itself with an independent schedule. But the academic requirements were another thing entirely. In 1951, Tulane president Rufus Harris dramatically decreased the amount of football scholarships the team would be able to give out to 75. He also slashed the coaching staff payroll. But the real damaging decision came when he forced Tulane's athletes to adhere to a typical Tulane student schedule, which essentially raised their academic requirements from PE classes to Southern Ivy-level bachelor's degrees. Before the decision, most Tulane football players didn't even have a declared major. His reasoning for this was to re-emphasize Tulane's standing as an academic institution. Back in the 50s and 60s, while on-campus sports were definitely a highlight of the student experience at a university, they were far from the most important aspect. Schools were in an arms race to become more prestigious in their education, especially in the Deep South, where stigmas about intelligence started to erase. I've already talked about this a little bit in my Magnolia League video from a while ago, but the fact of the matter was that Tulane saw an avenue towards becoming one of the best academic institutions in the country, not just the South, and took off sprinting toward that target. In a lot of ways, football and even sports were in the way of that target. The results were predictable. Less talented athletes came to Tulane, and now that they weren't in a major conference, even less talented athletes came to Tulane. With scholarship numbers in the 30s, Jim Pittman ended his time as Green Wave head coach with a 21-30-1 record. He managed to lead the Green Wave to an 8-4 record in 1970, concluding with a Liberty Bowl win over Colorado, before bolting for TCU in 1971. It was so hard to win at Tulane that a good year meant that you took the best job offer you could get before it was taken from you. Unfortunately, Coach Pittman would pass away of a heart attack during a game against Baylor that season at the age of 46. To replace him, Tulane sought out Arkansas State head coach Benny Ellender. Ellender had coached the Indians to an 11-0 record and an NCAA College Division national title in 1970, finishing with an overall record of 52-20-4 over 8 seasons in Jonesboro. Tulane brass figured that since he succeeded at doing more with less in essentially D2, he'd be able to replicate that at an institution like Tulane. Despite a 9-3 record and a loss in the Bluebonnet Bowl in 1973, Coach Ellender would be fired after a 4-7 campaign in 1975. He finished with just a 27-29 record in New Orleans. 1975 would see change in more ways than just the head coaching position, as Tulane finally said goodbye to their old football stadium. Opened in 1926, Tulane Stadium had served both the Green Wave and the annual Sugar Bowl, so much so that it was often just referred to as the Sugar Bowl. The Green Wave would move into the Louisiana Superdome in 1975, which was created mostly as an excuse to house the New Orleans Saints. It was initially conceptualized as a multi-purpose stadium and was Tulane's first field that utilized synthetic turf instead of natural grass. But it wasn't really Tulane Stadium, and it never was, even back at the beginning. Tulane Stadium went the way of the dodo due to being in general disrepair, and it was destroyed in the 1980s. Essentially, the Green Wave weren't just a struggling football team, they were homeless too. They'd attempt to rebound with Arizona defensive coordinator Larry Smith. Smith had never been a head coach, but was a part of Bo Schembechler's staff at Miami of Ohio and later at Michigan. After 3 bad seasons showing signs of improvement every year, he was finally able to lead the Green Wave to a 9-3 season with an appearance in the Liberty Bowl, where they lost to fellow independent Penn State 9-6. But again, just like Jim Pittman, he leapt at the first sign of success and returned to Arizona to be the head coach in 1980. To follow him up, Tulane signed Vince Gibson. Now, I know a thing or two about Vince Gibson, and Vince Gibson knew a thing or two about bad teams. He served as the head coach at Kansas State from 1967 to 1974, where he never won any more than 6 games in a season, but that was okay, because that might as well have been a national title for a program as horrendously bad as K-State was back then. Long story short, though, he got himself mixed up with some recruiting violations, which LMAO, and decided to jump to Louisville for the 1975 season. He coached there until 1980, compiling a record of 25-29-2 with an Independence Bowl appearance in 1977. This was the best Tulane could get in the 80s. His Green Wave teams would go 17-17 from 1980 to 1982 before retiring from football and entering the travel business. This was actually a huge success for Tulane. They beat LSU 2 out of his 3 years as head coach, including a 48-7 beatdown in 1981. But with Gibby out of football, they were once again on the market for a new head coach, and in 1983, they ended up with Wally English. Coach English wasn't able to will the Green Wave into any more than 3 wins a season, and after just 2 years, he was out in New Orleans. No small part of it was that coaching assistant Bob Davie was apparently discovered sending assistants to go spying on opponent practices, leaving a black mark on the program. With nobody else interested, they turned to the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. By this point in his career, Mack Brown had seen all sorts of ups and downs. After starting as a middling receivers coach and offensive coordinator at Iowa State, he became the quarterbacks coach at LSU in 1982, which he parlayed into a head coaching job at Appalachian State in 1983. He'd go just 6-5 with the Mountaineers that year before finding himself as an offensive coordinator again, this time with the Oklahoma Sooners under Barry Switzer. Years after his career at Tulane ended, he had become a household name for winning a national title with Vince Young as his quarterback at Texas, and non-consecutive stints at his alma mater of North Carolina to lead the Tar Heels from 1988 to 1997, and then 2018 to 2024. But I'd argue that the Tulane job might have been the best coaching performance of his entire career. You wouldn't know it from the numbers, though. In 3 years with the Green Wave, he'd compile a record of just 11-23, with one season at 500, leading Tulane to an Independence Bowl loss in his final year as head coach in 1987. But the reality was so much deeper than that. Tulane basketball had just been embroiled in a point-shaving scandal that was so extensive that the program shut itself down for 4 years, only to be brought back after protests from students. Tulane's previous athletic director had vacated his chair over the ordeal. This left Tulane athletics without an acting AD, and since Mac was right there, they made him athletic director too. Without a basketball program to look over, Coach Brown's first order of business, other than attempting to field a winning team, was to make sure that the team continued to exist. In the middle of the 1985 season, Tulane brokers got together before a game against Southern Miss and voted whether or not to drop the football program entirely. Some brokers suggested that Tulane drop their football scholarships and dip down into Division III for football. There was a very real moment where Tulane almost dropped football as a varsity sport. But they didn't. Instead, after Mac Brown left to lead his alma mater for the first time, they brought in Greg Davis to lead the team. The next few coaches here didn't do much as an independent with Tulane, but they kept the program afloat. Davis would go 14-31 before getting fired in 1992 and replaced with Buddy Tevens, who would go an awful 11-45 with the Green Wave. But he'd be the head coach for the first step in the right direction for Tulane. Reportedly, Tulane had been bit by the conference bug again sometime in the 80s. He had been approached by the Tulane athletic department sometime before the scandals hit about potentially rejoining the league. While the SEC wasn't interested in them, they were interested in expanding back out west and would eventually add the Arkansas Razorbacks to their conference lineup. But for Tulane, that conversation was nothing more than the door behind them getting slammed shut and locked. The SEC no longer wanted Tulane, and given how far the program fell, they might never want them again. But with independence becoming less and less viable by the year and conference television payouts becoming a thing, Tulane needed somewhere to call home. Luckily for them, they had the Metro Conference. When Tulane had left the Southeastern Conference in the 60s, they needed to figure out where all of their programs would go, not just football. Football chose independence, while the majority of their programs would end up elsewhere. In 1975, the Metro Conference was created as a non-football athletics conference that featured 6 programs in eastern metropolitan areas: Cincinnati, Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Louisville, Memphis State, St. Louis, and Tulane in New Orleans. Over the years, the Metro would change shape a handful of times, but would pretty much always stay with the same central theme of schools in major metro areas. Tulane would remain a member of the conference for its entire run. Around the late 80s and early 1990s, it began to become clear that independent football wasn't going to work. Conferences like the Southeastern Conference, Big Ten, Pac-10, and even the Big 8 had begun work on lucrative television packages, and one discovery made an immediate impact. The more people are in your range, the more money your conference and its teams make. This was especially important following the 1985 NCAA versus Oklahoma Board of Regents Supreme Court case, which saw the NCAA's iron grip on conference television deals deteriorate. A conference like the Metro, which didn't sponsor football but whose teams largely did, with access to some of the largest cities in the United States, could feasibly become one of the richest conferences in college sports overnight. All they needed was a football league. In 1990, Conference Brass got together to discuss how a league would work. 8 was enough for a relatively high-performing football league already, but there were more independents that could join the league. They'd keep a grip on the South by adding East Carolina and Miami, while stretching into the North by adding Boston College, Pittsburgh, Rutgers, Syracuse, and West Virginia. The belle of the ball in this package, though, was Penn State, who would instantly become the biggest brand in the conference. When they backed out to join the Big Ten, they were replaced in the proposal by Temple. But Florida State would back out to join the ACC a year later, and the plan collapsed. But that didn't mean that the Metro was out of the running as a national conference focused on metro areas. In 1995, it merged with the Great Midwest Conference to create the aptly named Conference USA, with members of Cincinnati, DePaul, Louisville, Memphis, Marquette, St. Louis, USF, Charlotte, Southern Miss, UAB, and Tulane. When the league began a football league in 1996, Tulane was joined by Cincy, Louisville, Memphis, Southern Miss, and Houston as the league's inaugural members. Each of these programs were considered high-ceiling programs in high-population areas, with the exception of Southern Miss, who was riding high off a near half-century of football excellence. While the Conference USA era brimmed with hope for Tulane, it wasn't immediately felt. The Green Wave went 2-9 in their first season in the conference and decided to move away from Coach Tevens. Enter Tommy Bowden. The other Bowden arrived in New Orleans by way of a 6-year tenure as the offensive coordinator at Auburn. Using the same roster that just went 2-9 under Coach Tevens, Coach Bowden was able to guide the Green Wave to a 7-4 season and their first time finishing above 500 since 1987. The following year, he broke college football wide open. 1998 was a weird year in general. A Peyton Manningless Tennessee cracked their way into the national title game, UCLA barely lost out on a chance to go at the last minute, and a football team that was 10 years removed from being the worst team in college football history gave themselves generational trauma. And somewhere, lost in the middle of it all, Tulane put up one of the greatest seasons in mid-major history. They started the season off with a 52-34 shootout win over Cincinnati. They followed that up with a 10-point win over SMU, followed by a 20-point win over Independent Navy. They eked out relatively close wins over Southern Miss and Louisville in conference play before dropping a 50-burger on Rutgers. They then proceeded to erase Louisiana Lafayette off the surface of the planet before beating Memphis by 10, Army by 2 scores, Houston by 4, and Louisiana Tech by more than 30 to finish the year undefeated and champions of Conference USA. Tulane would finish the year scoring over 45 points per game, good enough to be the second best scoring offense in the entire country for the 1998 season. The architect of this firebombing unit was quarterback Sean King. King threw for over 3,200 yards, a conference-leading 36 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He also added a good 500-plus yards and 10 rushing touchdowns on the ground. Despite all of this, Tulane wasn't even considered for a BCS Bowl because they had the 97th ranked strength of schedule. No team they played that year was ranked. They finished ranked 7th in the polls, but that still wasn't seen as enough for them to play in one of the top bowls to end the year. They instead got to play BYU in the Liberty Bowl, where they won 41-27 to finish as the last undefeated team in Green Wave history. As can be expected, Coach Bowden got a better job offer and left Tulane to go coach the Clemson Tigers for the 1999 season. Tulane turned to Louisiana native Chris Scelfo, who was only able to muster one bowl season with the Green Wave before getting fired and replaced with Bob Toledo, who never won any more than 4 games in 5 seasons. They chose Toledo over Scelfo's offensive coordinator, Rich Rodriguez, who ended up being pretty good at West Virginia. I'm sure they didn't regret that decision. Curtis Johnson's head coaching career that followed wasn't notable for what happened on the field, as the Green Wave would go just 15-34 in 4 seasons under his leadership. It was more interesting for what happened off of it. The long, drawn-out death of the Big East not only gave us such bangers as West Virginia and the Big 12 and Boston College and UConn developing a blood feud over an ACC invite, it also created an awkward situation where Tulane became one of the last schools to be added to the quote-unquote Big East, what they assumed would be a power conference. What they ended up joining instead was the renamed American Athletic Conference, which retained its BCS Autonomy Conference status for all of 1 year before the playoff system rendered it irrelevant. In 2014, the team finally found their own home again with the newly built Yulman Stadium. Seating 30,000 spectators, it formed the perfect home for one of the bigger brands in the American Athletic Conference. In 2015, the Green Wave had enough of Curtis Johnson and let him go. In his place, they hired Georgia Southern head coach Willie Fritz. In just 3 years, Fritz was able to lead the squad to their first conference championship game appearance in school history after a 7-6 season, and they won their first bowl game since 2002 with a Cure Bowl win. They went 7-6 again in 2019, followed by a 6-6 season in 2020 before stumbling to a 2-10 year in 2021. But instead of letting go of Coach Fritz at the first sign of struggle, they stuck with him, and they were rewarded. They started the year with a thorough dismantling of independent UMass before taking the bye game against Alcorn State and outmuscling the eventual Big 12 champions, Kansas State, Manhattan 17-10. The hangover from that game extended to the next week, where they dropped a game against rivals Southern Miss 24-27. They responded by traveling to Houston and gutting out another close win. They took down ECU a week later, followed by another win against USF, Memphis, and then Tulsa. They lost their next game against ranked UCF and proceeded to not lose another game to end the year. They knocked off wins against SMU, ranked Cincinnati, and then the rematch against UCF in the conference championship. Despite missing out on the playoffs with an 11-2 record, Tulane was still set to play USC in the Cotton Bowl, the most prestigious bowl game in the history of Tulane football. And they won. Man, I wish I could show you some footage from the ending of that game without ESPN or some other company throwing a fit. If you get the chance, go watch some videos of it. Not going to say from who, but I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? It's what college football is all about. Just like a few of their good coaches before, Coach Fritz wasn't long for the headset in New Orleans, and after another double-digit win season in 2023 that earned him a contract extension, he left a few miles to the west to coach the Houston Cougars anyway. To replace him, though, Tulane pulled in one of the better coaching minds in the G6 with the hiring of John Sumrall from Troy. He went 23-4 in 2 seasons with the Troy Trojans, winning 2 straight Sun Belt titles and instantly brought that level of fight to the Green Wave. For the first time in a long time, there was sustained success through 2 straight coaches, with the 2024 season ending in a 9-5 record, and the Green Wave locking down a college football playoff appearance in 2025. But with so much of the world changing, the Green Wave still hadn't been considered much for the Power Four, specifically with the Big 12 seemingly constantly looking into expansion over the last 10 to 15 years. Their first opportunity to join the Big 12 came pretty soon after the conference's first loss of members, in 2016. Just a few years after losing Colorado to the Pac-12, Nebraska to the Big 10, and Mizzou and Texas A&M to the Southeastern Conference, the Big 12 was left backfilling with West Virginia and TCU back in 2010 and 2011, but there were thoughts that there could be even more. In 2015, OU President David Boren, after Texas shut down the admission of Louisville into the conference a couple years earlier, went public about the fact that he'd like for the Big 12 to have 12 teams instead of 10. That instantly brought out a host of schools with applications to join them, of which Tulane was one of them. But out of applicants like BYU, Boise State, Cincinnati, UConn, Houston, Memphis, UCF, and USF, even schools like New Mexico and Arkansas State, Tulane didn't make the top half of the applicants. In fact, nobody did. After fielding somewhere north of 15 applications from schools, they decided not to add anybody after all, a decision that Boren and Oklahoma agreed with. How'd that work out for them? Well, just over 5 years later, Oklahoma and Texas both decided to leave the Big 12 Conference for the SEC, creating a 16-team Super Conference and kickstarting the true beginning of the Super Conference era. While that created a handful of echoes across the college football landscape, its immediate aftershock was one that more directly affected Tulane. The Big 12 was now the Big 8 again, and desperately needed to add more schools to keep the conference from being picked apart and fading. They once again looked into expansion. But the second round of Big 12 expansion was even shorter. Dusting off those old resumes of plenty of those schools, it wasn't long before the Big 12 settled on their 4 new schools. Houston, one of the last schools from the old Southwest Conference that wasn't in a power conference. Cincinnati, one of the better-run athletics departments in the Group of 5 and a former Big East Conference mate of West Virginia. And BYU, with one of the biggest fan bases in college athletics. The last school they added was UCF, with one of the highest ceilings of any of the Group of 5 schools. Tulane was left behind again. By the time realignment was whizzing once again and the Pac-12 was now in desperate need of finding new schools just a couple years after that, Tulane looked like one of the best candidates available. In fact, pretty soon after adding 5 schools from the Mountain West and non-football member Gonzaga, the Pac-12 tried to leverage their momentum and had conversations with a bunch of schools like USF, Memphis, UTSA, UConn, and Tulane, among others. The only problem was that the conference was reportedly strapped on cash, and each of those schools, including Tulane, decided they'd rather wait out a better offer. The offer they were given amounted to a pretty lateral move considering what the AAC was working with. The Pac-12 was on a time crunch and elected to settle for Texas State, getting them to 8 football-playing members for now. While that doesn't mean that the door to the Pac-12 is shut entirely, the conference will need to find the funds to convince those programs that it's a step up from the American, especially considering the travel that'll be necessary. That leaves Tulane without a conference openly searching for another addition, unless you consider the Pac-12. The best opening might be in the currently 17-member ACC, which sits precariously on the edge of losing Florida State, Clemson, and potentially others. With its additions of Stanford and Cal, the conference needed a member in the central United States to help facilitate ease of scheduling, and SMU, located in Dallas, could not have volunteered loud enough. And they did literally volunteer. But with potential departures, not only could the conference look to teams like USF and UConn, who are already in the East, but a top-tier G6 school like Tulane probably should be considered to help fill in that central time zone a little more, especially considering New Orleans is a hop, skip, and a jump away from Dallas. But why should a conference like the Pac-12 or the Big 12 or the ACC even consider a school like Tulane? For starters, Tulane is famous for being one of the top schools in the country, something the ACC is known to be attracted to. Back in the mid-2010s, I really wanted the Big 12 to add Tulane and help them grow because I saw value in having a strong academic institution in SEC country that would grow with the right supervision and support. It has a pretty small undergrad size of just over 8,000 students, putting them around the same range as other private schools like Duke, Wake Forest, and TCU. New Orleans isn't a massive market, sitting at the 50th ranked television market in terms of size according to Nielsen, but that's still higher than some other places that have Power 4 teams, like Knoxville, Tucson, and Lincoln. The big difference there is how much money those teams earn, and while Tulane isn't in the same stratosphere at the moment, it is on the up and up. Being a private school, they don't disclose their athletics revenues to the public, but the university does have an endowment of $2.11 billion, and with recent works like an indoor practice facility being built and winning football, it looks like Tulane's income is probably on the higher side of teams in the American. But that gets us to Tulane's biggest issue in terms of joining a power conference, and that's their football success rate. During all those years of wilderness, the Green Wave sunk pretty far down in the win column, and they currently sit at a winning percentage of just around 45%. Their last conference titles before 25, 22, and 98 came in the 30s and 40s. Despite being in the talent-rich state of Louisiana and being in the most famous city in that state, Tulane plays second and sometimes third fiddle to LSU at all times. No amount of winning or jumping to the Big 12 or ACC is likely going to change that. Combine that with the fact that Tulane's best sport on campus is a non-revenue program in baseball. The basketball teams play in an arena that isn't suited for power conference play, and the men's program last made the tournament in 1995. What you're getting with Tulane in terms of results is a football school that hasn't really proved it's all that good at football yet. Football success has time and time again proven to be a primary factor in realignment decisions, second only to the university's ability to make more money for other conference members. If you win, you make money, and Tulane hasn't really had continuous winning until these past few years. That's their biggest issue, is that they're in a dead sprint against not just USF and Memphis for one last lifeboat to the power conferences, but they desperately need to outrun their own past in order to make it. This is tough. I know Tulane can be a power conference team. We need something more persuasive, some type of propaganda. I need to make a call.
In Voss's office. Boss, it's for you.
Leave me alone. Can't you see I'm busy procrastinating on my next video?
But boss, it's that Kansas State college football YouTuber. He's making a video about Tulane. And
Well, why didn't you say so? Hold on, just gotta turn on the Tulane propaganda machine.
Don't disrespect New Orleans ever.
Perfect. Number 5, the fan base. Tulane is a passionate alumni base spread out all across America, which is a solid plus. But with the success on the field, more and more students are coming in now with the expectation of being a fan of a successful team. And the alumni base has proven that they will show up when Tulane is playing interesting teams, aka schools that aren't named Rice or Florida Atlantic or Alabama Birmingham or Temple or Tulsa or North Carolina Charlotte or... Number 4, success. Tulane has had a protracted pattern of success in many sports in the last half-decade after years of administrative apathy. Not just in football, though obviously football talks, and Tulane has been the class of the group of 5 for 4 years now. Go watch my Tulane football videos. But Tulane is also historically good at baseball and has made 3 straight conference championships there. They've improved their position in basketball under Ron Hunter after 2 decades of basement dwelling. Although the debate on whether he's reached his ceiling has ravaged the fan base for now 3 seasons. And Tulane also sports one of the nation's best sailing teams. Tulane also is on the cutting edge of NIL stuff. The Wave was a huge boon for the program's successes, and they're one of the first teams to have taken their NIL operation fully in-house. Tulane is finally taking athletics seriously, which leads us into number 3, facilities. Tulane may not have the flashiest or largest athletic facilities, but they have invested heavily recently in improving all of them, most recently of which is their new indoor practice facility for the football team. I know what you're thinking. It took this long for them to get a bubble? Welcome to New Orleans. What's honestly more important though is that the facilities are right-sized for the school, which is still less than 15,000 combined students total. It's a beautiful thing that we don't need to see Tulane try and fail to fill up the Superdome ever again. Speaking of which, number 2, location. Tulane is in a massively strategic location for any Power 4 conference looking to get a stakehold in the South. Right now, the SEC owns the state of Louisiana because of LSU, but it doesn't have to be this way. Imagine the recruiting pitch one can give to Louisiana players who aren't quite SEC caliber but want to have a game close to home every now and then. Boom, Yeoman Stadium. Not to mention grabbing the New Orleans TV markets. We still care about TV markets, right? And if I allow myself to get hypothetical here, it's hard not to see the city of New Orleans caring more about Tulane once Tulane starts playing teams whose names actually move the needle on a regular basis. Don't get it twisted, Tulane will never be LSU, but on the bright side, that means you don't have to deal with the literal governor of the state pulling a hostile takeover of the athletic department, so maybe that's okay. By the way, LSU still owes Tulane a football home game. Number 1, they're cool. I mean, come on, they're cool. Just look at their colors, look at their uniforms, look at the logo. Look at it. This logo is one of the best in all of college sports. Stare into its soul. See how angry it is. You know why he's angry? Because he's not in the Power 4. You wouldn't want to make this guy more angry, would you? I didn't think so.
Now back to the show.
And really, that's what it gets down to. Culturally, Tulane is one of the most vibrant and entertaining schools in the entire southern United States, and the entire program is on such a huge upswing that it's hard not to see it as a trend. Yes, John Summerall is gone and now the head coach at Florida, but this is a Tulane team that won another American championship and made it to the college football playoff in 2025. It would take someone who was fundamentally an awful coach to ruin this for Tulane at this point. Son of a bitch.